Thank you, Professor Compton Bourne, for being here with us today.
My
We've
pleasure.
we've just launched the Caribbean Human Development Report in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have just a few questions for you. So firstly, can you tell us a bit about Caribbean Human Development Report and the inspiration behind it?
Well, the report, the 2016 Caribbean Human Development Report, is the second in a series of such reports, I think. The first one dealt with crime and security. This one focuses on the issue of or the problem of multidimensional progress and human vulnerability, and situates that in the context of the current and future economic performance of the Caribbean. The reason for the focus on multidimensional progress is partly in recognition of the fact that traditional thinking has focused on income and economic growth in a very aggregate sense, a very holistic sense, and at the same time a narrow sense, and has not looked at what really constitutes progress for people. What things do people regard as making for progress in their own lives, and how might those things be affected by the way in which the countries organize their economies and their social policies.
Okay, thank you. So you spoke about the multidimensional approach to measuring progress. So can you share with us some of the other indicators beside income that you find you need to use to measure the progress?
Yes. The main indicators used in part come out of the Human Development Report that was pioneered by UNDP and particularly Professor Sen years ago, which tried to move beyond income by looking at educational indicators, at certain health indicators, and looking at later on about environmental sustainability indicators. This report goes into a lot more depth on many of those areas. So we look at access to, well, first of all, we look at the performance of the countries in relation to various dimensions of health, of healthy living, maternal health, infant mortality, chronic diseases, which was not featured before. We look at that. We talk about access to the healthcare facilities. And then when we shift ground and we look at education, for instance, we look at not only at primary enrollment rates and secondary enrollment rates, but we look at completion rates, or the throughput and performance rates. You know, how do the people perform in the school system? Recognizing that to be registered as being in school is not a sufficient indicator of developing the ability to secure one's future in the society and in the labor market. We examine the particular vulnerabilities of different groups like women, particularly in relation to how they are situated in the labor market and the disadvantages they experience in the labor market, the questions of violence against women, dependence, and other forms of difficulties. We do likewise for youths who, like women, are quite disadvantaged in the labor market with very weak employment prospects, with jobs that are increasingly not paying as well as jobs that male adults would be paid. With the youth suffer for the problem of having very long transitions between getting a job, leaving school and getting a job, and that could be quite demoralizing and demotivating, and links with one of the big problems the Caribbean has, and that is the loss of its people. through emigration. The CARICOM secretary did a report that showed that, I can't remember the statistic now, but like 1 in 5 young people felt they wanted to leave the region, and that's a terrible thing. So we look at the youth, we look at the elderly and their particular problems. We look at people with disabilities, which again is a great area of need. So there are a number of indicators, and we use indicators and we focus on particularly disadvantaged groups or particularly vulnerable groups to talk about how their issues might be addressed and why it makes a difference to economic growth performance if you address those difficulties.
Thank you. And based on the findings of this report, what are the major gaps or hindrances to development that you find in the Caribbean region?
Well, there are quite a few, and the report gets into many of them in great detail. Obviously, one is the question of revitalizing and sustaining Caribbean economic growth, because the report recognizes that countries that are experiencing economic growth they have the wherewithal to do more to address some of the problems of the various other areas of multidimensional progress. So revitalizing economic growth either by diversifying economies, strengthening some existing sectors, transforming some existing sectors, improving export market arrangements, all those things will contribute to making it easier to advance human progress. But the report also recognizes that advancing human progress itself is an important part of the growth effort of generating economic growth. That people are integral to the economic growth process as workers and in many other ways. And if you improve their capabilities, then you will have a greater contribution to economic growth. So they are interdependent rather than one being dependent on the other.
Okay, thank you. And we know that in the Caribbean there would be varying economics status among the different islands. So how does the report factor in the unique vulnerabilities faced in the different countries?
Well, the surprise is that they're not so different. they're not so different. On some indicators you get major differences. But if you look at economic growth rates, the region, there are only 2 countries in the region that have been showing positive economic growth in over the last, say, 10 years. Guyana and Suriname, because of the mineral exports, bauxite and gold. You have high unemployment rates in pretty much all countries and rising unemployment rates in all. Trinidad and Tobago is unique in having a relatively low unemployment rate, but as we know, as the economy enters into a period of difficulty, unemployment has increased. They're almost on the same page with respect to the incidence of chronic diseases and mortality due to chronic diseases. The same page with respect to provision, vulnerability to maternal deaths, infant mortality, and so on. There are degrees. The differences are marginal rather than substantial.
Okay.
So they all have the problem, too, of trying to find new generators of economic growth.
Okay, thank you. And then the final question. The report was just launched here in Trinidad and Tobago, and based on the discussions held today, what major takeaways or advice can you share with us?
Well, for me, the most important takeaway is the knowledge, I would say the knowledge, certainly the argument we make, that the countries, meaning government and other parties in the country, other entities, should give sustained attention to improving the capacity of the various groups that we have identified as being particularly vulnerable. That we can, for instance, make a big contribution to our economic growth if we were to more actively employ our labor force, our young labor force, our female labor force, if we were to reduce the hemorrhage of emigration. We can make a contribution to productivity and to economic growth if we provided better education, better quality education, if more people had access to improved education, if health care was better, so there was less incidence of illness and absenteeism through illness, so there are a variety of things centered on improving the conditions for people that feed right into the economic growth system. And I think that to me is important because it causes a shift away from our traditional focus in policy, which is to build more physical things.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for contributing to the 2030 Caribbean series of dialogues and interviews. For more information on the work of the United Nations and sustainable development in the Caribbean region, visit www.2030caribbean.org.